preferred her asleep. This is a line from the famous folktale Sleeping Beauty, a story centered around a young girl who is cursed to sleep for 100 years until a prince comes to save her. On the surface, it's a heartwarming tale that illustrates love and is known to provide comfort to people worldwide. But underneath, these seemingly comforting stories, with its demeaning descriptions, harness a much more sinister influence than people think. PhD candidate Glenn Saxby explains that the significance of folktales stems from its role as simple stories for communities to organize their beliefs. But as they were transformed into more permanent mediums, its mainly traditional values have become ingrained into modern society. Of course, traditionalism isn't inherently bad, but it is a clear example of how our organizational culture operates. The College Board provided stimulus titled Moral Courage and Intelligent Disobedience by Ted Thomas and Ira Chaliff explains how leaders set the standard in what they enforce, to which followers then reinforce the culture or develop a subculture counter to the espoused culture. This means that in the same way people tend to follow values of an established power, it can be discerned that folktales also set outdated standards that people continue to abide by, even subconsciously. Good afternoon, my name is Rachel Nguyen, and this is Gender Inequality in Folktales. Now that the basics have been introduced, we will be answering the question, to what extent do the traditional themes commonly outlined in folktales impact Western culture when translated into modern society? To which the argument is that, contrary to popular belief, folktales have a substantially negative impact in Western culture due to its enforcement of gender inequality through stereotypes, childhood, and representation. First is stereotypes. As seen through the majority of Western folktales, there is a common recurring theme revolving around perspectives on men versus women. Angela Smith, a specialist in the Department of Culture at the University of Sunderland, recognizes these differences, stating that male characters are commonly associated with more logical characteristics, while female characters were pictured as irrational. These negative stereotypes extend even further, as Professor Shadyini May of Literary and Cultural Studies at Hashemite University explains how women are reduced to the dichotomies of good or evil, depicted as either rightfully submissive or deceitful when given a position of power. This is seen in common archetypes such as the damsel in distress versus the evil witch. And by portraying women in such negative extremities, it not only puts an entire gender in an inferior position, but it eliminates all meaning and variation between characters of different folktales. Next is childhood. Though it isn't exactly a folktale, the College Board provided stimulus titled Through the Tunnel by Doris Lessing serves as a fitting example to preface this aspect. The story is centered around a young boy who, upon admiring a group of older boys swimming through a dangerous tunnel, decides to naively follow suit. One of the most prominent themes that can be drawn from this is how impressionable young children tend to be. And so, the same parallel is established in the realm of folktales, in which Nimei states that major fairy tales rely on the innocent, beautiful, and young female figure as the model that girls should look up to and emulate. And again, it can be argued that this isn't destructive in itself, but it continues to portray one gender in an incredibly vulnerable manner, as seen here. This table by Professor Stelios Michaelopoulos and Melanie Meng Shui at Brown and Northwestern University shows that dominance was much higher in male character motifs or characteristics with a 33% frequency. Female motifs, on the other hand, were usually associated with domestic affairs and scored highest on being submissive and dependent, with approximately 30% frequency. Last is representation. As shown in this scatter plot, also by Michaelopoulos and Meng Shui, the exact values just discussed have clearly been translated into Western society. Here we can see the difference in mother versus king-related motifs in terms of family organization and political hierarchy, characterized by the steeper incline on the right. This means that, on average, men appear as more dominant, less submissive, and more intelligent in real life compared to women, who instead rank higher on engagement with domestic affairs. This isn't limited to the general public either, as it is commonly reflected in the political world as well. Columnist Shannon Greenwood of the Pew Research Center discovered that men have significantly less faith in a potential female US president than women do, represented by the green dots on the lower side of the scale. And if we look specifically at the education and healthcare sector, the notably higher trust here compared to other key policies ties back into all of the aforementioned perspectives. Michaelopoulos and Meng Shui explain that societies whose folklore portrays women as less dominant, more submissive, and more likely to engage in domestic affairs than men tend to relegate their women to inferior roles in their communities, both historically and today. This confirms the notion that the association of women with these types of domestic affairs in both folktale and reality isn't merely a matter of correlation, bringing us to our solution. The best solution is to abolish these outdated social norms by rewriting degrading folktales. This can be taken both figuratively, by shifting our overall perspective on the subject matter, and literally, by reforming our literature, film, etc. But the main goal is to ensure that what is being projected into society does not push harmful stereotypes onto our youth, nor inject biases in representation. It's important to change with the times in order to breed a culture built upon equality that aligns with modern Western customs. Now, of course, this is easier said than done, as there are limitations. The reason is because, first, folk tales have become so deeply integrated that it's difficult to account for every perspective. The second limitation goes back to the idea of an organizational culture, in which the development of a subculture counter to the espoused culture becomes evident, as the College Board stimulus explained. This means there are always going to be the traditionalists and extreme feminists at disagreement. This brings us to the last limitation, which simply explains that controversy in society is likely inevitable. But amidst all of these drawbacks, it's imperative that we realize the importance of moving past our differences and creating a new, healthier way to tell humanity's stories. Thank you.
All right, so 2 questions for you. First up, how did your research question evolve as you moved through the entire process?
My research question actually evolved a lot as I delved deeper into my research, because at the beginning, it started off with just talking about folktales and modern social values. But then as I browsed my sources, I realized that the topic was much too broad and that I had to narrow it down to a more relevant topic, being gender inequality and Western culture folktales, because it's such a prominent issue in society that I recognized in all of my sources.
Okay, and if you had more time, what additional research would you conduct on this issue?
If I had more time, I would have conducted research on a perspective regarding safety for women, because I realized as I went through my research, for example, a source by, I believe, Michaelopoulos and Melanie Meng Shui, the table also talked about how women in folktales are portrayed to also be more sexual. And so that may also translate into certain situations in real life for women, such as safety concerns, including rape, domestic abuse, sexual assault, etc.